Hello everyone, and welcome back. We're going to talk about Session 4 today. Session 4 has a lot of questions about the pyramids and healing. So let's jump in. Ra's greeting says, I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. I communicate now. First question from Dawn is, finishing the last session, I had asked a question that was too long to answer. It had to do with the shape of the pyramid and its relationship to the initiation. Is this an appropriate time to ask this question? I am Ra. Yes, this is an appropriate time-space to ask that question. This is a good example of how Ra is very, very literal in only answering questions that Dawn asks and not answering questions that are assumed to be asked. So they're making Dawn ask the question formally again. So question 4.2 is, does the shape of the pyramid have effect upon the initiation? And Ra says, I am Ra. As we began the last session question, you have already recorded in your individual memory complex the first use of the shape having to do with the body complex initiation. The initiation of spirit was a more carefully designed type of initiation as regards the time-space ratios about which the entity to be initiated found itself. If you will picture with me the side of the so-called pyramid shape and mentally imagine this triangle cut into 4 equal triangles, you will find the intersection of the triangle, which is at the first level on each of the 4 sides, forms a diamond in a plane which is horizontal. The middle of this plane is the appropriate place for the intersection of the energies streaming from the infinite dimensions and the mind-body-spirit complexes of various interwoven energy fields. Thus it was designed that the one to be initiated would, by mind, be able to perceive and then channel this, shall we say, gateway to intelligent infinity. This, then, was the second point of designing this specific shape. May we provide a further description of any kind to your query? So, firstly, let me say I am not an expert on Ra's pyramid information. I'm not super into math. I mean, it's not that I don't understand math, it doesn't grab me in the way that it grabs a lot of people. Geometry just isn't super exciting to me. So I really don't look at the mathematical parts of the pyramid information. It's more about the spiritual functions of the pyramid information. So here Ra says that the pyramids were used to initiate the body via the entombing and the pseudo-death experience that they provided. And then they were also made to initiate the spirit. And in this way, the person who was ready to initiate their spirit, having done the work of initiating the mind, initiating the body, now they're ready to integrate those two together and balance those two aspects. This person has sensitized themselves enough to be able to perceive the inflowing, intelligent infinity that comes from the mathematical ratios that are created by the pyramid shape. So there are important geometric properties to the pyramid, and it was created so that the sensitized being, initiate/healer, would be able to receive the energy of intelligent infinity that is able to come through those specific mathematical ratios. And essentially, if I remember correctly from other people doing this math and geometry, the portion of the pyramid that they're talking about is the Queen's Chamber. This space that they're talking about where the energy comes through that can be perceived as intelligent infinity and wielded as intelligent infinity by the initiate is the Queen's Chamber, which makes sense. So question 4.3 is, as I understand it then, the initiate was to be on the center line of the pyramid, but at an altitude above the base as defined by the intersection of the 4 triangles made by dividing each side into 4 triangles. Is that correct? Ra says this is correct. Questioner, then at this point, there is a focusing of energy that is extra-dimensional in respect to our dimensions. Am I correct? And Ra says, you may use that vibratory sound complex, however, it is not totally and specifically correct, as there are no extra dimensions. We would prefer the use of the term multi-dimensions. And then Dawn asks, is the size of the pyramid a function in effectiveness of the initiation? And Ra says, I am Ra. Each size pyramid has its own point of streaming in of intelligent infinity. Thus, A tiny pyramid that can be placed below a body or above a body will have specific and various effects depending upon the placement of the body in relationship to the entrance point of intelligent infinity. For the purposes of initiation, the size needed to be large enough to create the expression of towering size, so that the entrance point of multidimensional intelligent infinity would completely pervade and fill the channel, the entire body being able to rest in this focused area. Furthermore, it was necessary for healing purposes that both channel and the one to be healed to be able to rest within that focused point. So here they're saying that a small pyramid still has functions, that it has energy that can be accessed depending on where you place it in proximity to the body. But the large pyramids that they built were designed so that at least 2 people inside of the pyramid would be reached by the intelligent infinity that's created by the geometric ratios. So then we have 4.6. Dawn asks, is the large pyramid at Giza still usable for this purpose, or is it no longer functioning? And Ra says, I am Ra. That, like many other pyramid structures, is like the piano out of tune. It, as this instrument would express, plays the tune, but oh, so poorly. The disharmony jangles the sensitive. Only the ghost of the streaming still remains due to the shifting of the streaming points, which is in turn due to the shifting electromagnetic field of your planet. Due also to the discordant vibratory complexes of those who have used the initiatory and healing place for less compassionate purposes. So here's where I was saying that the pyramids don't really work anymore. Most of them don't, because they were meant to work in a specific ratio to the specific in-streamings that were coming to our planet when they were built thousands of years ago. And also that they have been used for such a long period of time by the elite for, as Ross says, less compassionate, and they haven't actually introduced service to self or service to others yet. I don't believe here we've even talked about that. So service to self beings have been using the pyramids, and that detuned them essentially for their proper purposes of healing and initiation. So then we have question 4.7. Dawn asks, would it be possible to build a pyramid and properly align it and use it today with materials that we have available? And Ra says, I am Ra. It is quite possible for you to build a pyramid structure. The material used is not critical, merely the ratios of time-space complexes. However, the use of the structure for initiation and healing depends completely upon the inner disciplines of the channels attempting such work. So here Ra's clarifying that the pyramid has a function. It channels the intelligent infinity. However, it doesn't just initiate anyone. Like if you were to walk into the pyramid at Giza and it was functioning, if you weren't properly prepared for that energy, I don't want to say it wouldn't do anything. I think ultimately it actually can be harmful if you're not properly prepared in mind and body for this type of energy, to receive this type of energy. So the pyramid's function is dependent upon the orientation of the person using it. You can't just build a pyramid and expect magical things to happen because you're meditating in a pyramid. You have to do the work before that of balancing and preparation and prior meditation, ideally, which is what helps prepare the mind and the body to be initiated. So, yeah, the pyramid itself is not just above and beyond this magical device. You have to be in the correct orientation to be able to wield the magic that is created by the pyramid. So, question 4.8, Dawn asks, my question then would be, are there individuals incarnate upon the planet today who would have the necessary inner disciplines to, using your instructions, construct and initiate in a pyramid they built, and then possibly do it again? Is this within limits of what anyone can do on the planet today, or is there no one available for this? And Ra says, I am Ra. There are people, as you call them, who are able to take this calling at this nexus. However, we wish to point out once again that the time of the pyramids, as you would call it, is past. It is indeed a timeless structure. However, the streamings from the universe were, at the time we attempted to aid this planet, those which required a certain understanding of purity. This understanding has, as the streamings revolve and all things evolve, changed to a more enlightened view of purity. Thus, there are those among your people at this time whose purity is already one with intelligent infinity. Without the use of structures, healing/patient can gain healing. May we further speak to some specific point. So here Ra is saying that, yes, there are people who have initiated themselves who are alive right now, who would, in theory, be able to use the energy that we're talking about in, like, the ancient version of the Great Pyramid, or you could build a pyramid today that is, in theory, in tune, and these people could use it. However, pyramids aren't necessary to do this work on the same level that it was thousands and thousands of years ago when the pyramids were built. The pyramids were really an aid at that time to be able to achieve beyond what people were able to grasp on their own. But now we've evolved to a point where most humans are... So this goes into seniority of vibration, which we haven't talked about yet either. But all the humans who are incarnated right now at this time on Earth, right at this critical harvest era, are here because of seniority of vibration, which means that they're here because they're close to being harvested. They're close enough that within 1 or 2 more lifetimes, they may be able to reach harvest. Whereas 11,000 years ago, we were still, partway through our 3rd cycle, and there wasn't, we still don't have a lot of harvestable people. But even back then, the variance in polarity expression was wider, and there weren't people as close to the proper vibration of being able to activate those higher energy centers. So the pyramids were there to kind of give people a jump start, and we all, pretty much everyone who's incarnated right now, is close enough to be able to jumpstart themselves, essentially, to be able to make that leap. At another point later in the book, Ra talks about the green ray being a springboard to the upper energy centers. And we're right on the threshold of activating our green ray planet, our green ray collective consciousness. So individuals can make that choice to step into that awareness, that vibration on their own without these aids, without these tools. So question 4.9, Dawn asks, is it possible for you to instruct healing techniques if we could make available these individuals that have the native ability? And Ra says, I am Ra. It is possible. We must add that many systems of teach learning, the healing/patient nexus, are proper, given various mind-body-spirit complexes. We ask your imagination to consider the relative simplicity of the mind in the earlier cycle and less distorted, but often overly complex, views and thought/spirit processes of the same mind-body-spirit complexes after many incarnations. We also ask your imagination to conceive of those who have chosen the distortion of service and have removed their mind-body-spirit complexes from one dimension to another, thus bringing with them, in sometimes totally latent form, many skills and understandings which more closely match the distortions of the healing/patient processes. So here Ra is saying that, again, back during the time when they walked in Egypt, the humans on the earth hadn't accumulated nearly as many incarnations, and, from that point forward, each incarnation as a human is increasingly complicated by the various thought forms that we have collected as a society and a social memory complex. So they're saying that there are many ways to access the ability to be a healer right now. One of those, primarily, I would say, is being a doctor, like going through the training to be a doctor. Ra actually mentions that later, that is one of the ways that we train healers in our current social memory complex where we are. So while that's not necessarily the same thing as initiating the mind, the body, and the spirit so that you can be a purified channel for intelligent infinity, there is still a way to heal others through that distortion of healing. Then they also go on to say, we ask your imagination to conceive of those who have chosen the distortion of service and have removed their mind, body, spirit complexes from one dimension to another, thus bringing with them, in sometimes totally latent form, many skills and understandings which more closely match the distortions of the healing/patient process. That right there, they're talking about wanderers. They're saying, hey, you also have wanderers on the planet who have done this work in previous lifetimes in dimensions beyond your own. And then when they become and incarnate and are veiled, this knowledge is latent, and they're able to heal even if they're not quite aware of it yet, even if they haven't recognized that this is a possibility in their incarnation. So now we have question 410. Dawn asks, I would very much like to continue investigation into the possibility of this healing process, but I'm a little lost as to where to begin. Can you tell me what my first step would be? And Ra says, I am Ra. I cannot tell you what to ask. I may suggest that you consider the somewhat complex information just given and thus discover several avenues of inquiry. There is one, health, as you call it, in your polarized environment, but there are several significantly various distortions of types of mind-body-spirit complexes. Each type must pursue its own learned teaching in this area. So again, Ra is emphasizing that there are many avenues to healing, and so you have to find your own. We can't really guide you. We can't tell you which one to take, but you can ask us questions, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. And so Dawn asks, I would assume the first step would be to find an individual with ability brought with him into this incarnation. Is this correct? And Ra says, this is correct. And then Dawn asks, once I have selected an individual to perform healing, it would be helpful to receive instruction from you. Is this possible? And Ra says, I am Ra. This is possible given the distortions of vibratory sound complexes. Like, yes, this is possible. Dawn asks, I'm assuming then that the selected individual would necessarily be one who was very much in harmony with the law of one. Though he may not have any intellectual understanding of it, he should be living the law of one. Is this correct? And Ra says, I am Ra. This is both correct and incorrect. The first case, that being correctness, would apply to one such as the questioner itself, who has the distortion towards healing, as you call it. The incorrectness, which shall be observed, is the healing of those whose activities in your space-time illusion do not reflect the law of one, but whose ability has found its pathway to intelligent infinity regardless of the plane of existence from which this distortion is found. And I'm going to read the next one because Dawn asks Ra essentially to just rephrase what they just said. So 4.14 says, you can hear Jim or Dawn on the tape asking Jim, did you understand? And then goes back to Ra and says, I'm a little confused. I partially understood you. I'm not sure that I fully understood you. Could you restate that in another way? And Ra says, I can restate that in many ways, given this instrument's knowledge of your vibratory sound complexes. I will strive for a shorter distortion at this time. Two kinds there are who can heal. Those, such as yourself, who, having the innate distortion towards knowledge-giving of the law of one, can heal but do not, and those who, having the same knowledge but showing no significant distortion consciously towards the law of one in mind, body, or spirit, yet and nevertheless have opened a channel to the same ability. The point being that there are those who, without proper training, shall we say, nevertheless heal. It is a further item of interest that those whose life does not equal their work may find some difficulty in absorbing the energy of intelligent infinity, and thus become quite distorted in such a way as to cause disharmony in themselves and others, and perhaps even find it necessary to cease the healing activity. Therefore, those of the first type, those who seek to serve and are willing to be trained in thought, word, and action, are those who will be able to comfortably maintain the distortion towards service in the area of healing. So, here Ra is basically saying, Dawn's like, what if we found someone who could heal? Would you be able to train them? And Ra's saying, well, you're somebody who can heal. You have the distortion. Teach learning is a type of healing. Teaching is giving others an opportunity to gain awareness so that they can alleviate their own internal distortions and maybe access a less distorted version of themselves. It's not a direct literal way of healing as like a healer who is bringing in someone who's sick and focusing their energy on this one person and figuring out what's going on in their energy body that may need work and an alteration and fixing. But teaching in the way that Dawn has is a type of healing, and he's distorted towards wanting to help people gain awareness. And then Ra says that there are other people too who have opened a channel to intelligent infinity to be able to heal, like let's say just an average doctor. They're able to do this, even if they haven't done all of the spiritual work. I also think that they are alluding to beings who heal from the negative pathways to intelligent infinity. At a later point, they bring up how Rasputin heals from the yellow ray, and what that configuration does is it makes it so that the person to be healed becomes dependent upon the healer. I think a lot of our modern healers, as far as doctors go, do heal from that yellow ray, and people become kind of becomes a codependent relationship where if you don't have access to your doctor, you get sick again. Like you feel like they are the one who's healing you. Whereas, of course, Ra talks about how the healer isn't actually doing anything. The patient is the one who is accepting the less distorted configuration of self and energy body. The healer is just giving the opportunity. But when you're in a yellow ray healing relationship, you become, like I said, dependent upon the physician, the healer, whoever it is, and access to them and access to, let's say, like continued medication and stuff like that. And again, this isn't like a failing on anybody's part necessarily. This is just how we do healing right now. But then the interesting thing is Ra starts talking then about what they will name later as the law of responsibility. It is a further item of interest that those whose life does not equal their work may find some difficulty in absorbing the energy of intelligent infinity and thus become quite distorted in such a way as to cause disharmony in themselves and others, and perhaps find it necessary to cease the healing activity. So Ra explains this more later again, but essentially when you activate the higher chakras without properly balancing and activating the lower chakras, so when you're using intelligent infinity to heal, but you're still distorted in the chakras below that level of activation, you cause an imbalance in your energy body. And this then will cause distortions that need to be healed, essentially. It can make your body very distorted and ill, and you can, have ill health. So Ra's saying that if you are accessing intelligent infinity to heal, but you aren't embodying the type of self that a truly balanced being who has accessed intelligent infinity embodies, then you can cause a lot of distortions in yourself and in those who you're trying to heal. And I think one of the big dangers is, if you don't have enough energy going on in the lower chakras, eventually what happens is you fall into a negative configuration, which is using the orange and yellow rays to bypass the heart and the throat to get to intelligent infinity. So there are the two pathways to intelligent infinity, and if you're not doing the balanced service to others pathway to intelligent infinity, you may find yourself in the other side of the intelligent infinity. But if you aren't consciously polarizing one way or the other and you're trying to use intelligent infinity, you're going to create a lot of distortions, unintended distortions. A negative being is likely creating intended distortions, especially in their patient, intentionally cultivating that type of codependency. But if you are able to polarize, which is how you are supposed to get access to intelligent infinity in a balanced and useful way, and you embody that polarity, you aren't creating as many distortions. So anyway, that, like I said, has to do with the law of responsibility, which is as you become aware of things, you have to, as Ra says, for those whose life does not equal their work. So like, if you're doing the work, but you're not embodying, like, if you're telling others to do as you say, but you're not doing as you say, essentially, if you're kind of hypocritical in that way, I guess, if you, on the surface, claim to be this compassionate, benevolent healer, but you're not actually practicing compassion and benevolence, these types of things can cause a lot of distortions in the self, essentially. So we will very much talk about the law of responsibility more and more later, but here's Ra planting that seed, trying to give Dawn some topics and things to dig into and talk about. But as we know, Dawn is very focused on healing in this session right now. So in question 415, Dawn asks, then would it be possible for you to train us in healing practice? And Ra says, it is possible. And Dawn asks, will you train us? And Ra says, we will. And Dawn then asks, I have no idea of how long this would take, or if you can even tell us anything about that. Is it possible for you to give me a synopsis of the program of training required? I have no knowledge of what questions to ask at this point. I'll ask that question in hopes that it makes sense. So then Ra says, I am Ra, We consider your request for information, for as you noted, there are a significant number of vibratory sound complexes which can be used in sequence to train the healer. The synopsis is a very appropriate entry that you might understand what is involved. Firstly, the mind must be known to itself. This is perhaps the most demanding part of healing work. If the mind knows itself, then the most important aspect of healing has occurred, for consciousness is the microcosm of the law of one. The second part has to do with the disciplines of the body complexes. In the streamings reaching your planet at this time, these understandings and disciplines have to do with the balance between love and wisdom in the use of the body in its natural functions. The third area is the spiritual, and in this area, the first two disciplines are connected through the attainment of contact with intelligent infinity. So, Ra's synopsis here is that first step is balancing and understanding the mind. The mind is the microcosm. If you spend the amount of time that it takes to do so, which is a long time, to get your mind to a proper configuration where it's useful and understands itself and is able to recognize the thoughts that are coming through itself and sorting those thoughts into useful and attaching to those useful thoughts and seeing the ones that aren't useful and discarding those useful thoughts, then you've done a lot of work already to be healed. The second part then has to do with the disciplines of the body complex, as Ra's says. And it says has to do with the balance between love and wisdom in the use of the body and its natural functions. So when Ra talks about the body, they're talking about our physical body, our personal physical vehicle, but essentially the body also is the macrocosm, which is all of the physical creation around us. Everything you can see and touch essentially is the body. So the body has natural functions, and loosely you can refer to this as like science, the things that we know, the natural laws, physics, biology, these things that in general have a specific order of how they behave and how to respond to them. For instance, like there is so much power in the mind, and the mind can overwrite a lot of things in the body, but you can't get a big glass of arsenic and say, this is food, and convince yourself that it's food and drink the arsenic and be okay. Right? There are natural functions of the body. Poison is poisonous. Food can be energy for the body. These things are necessary to understand and then to apply love and wisdom into practicing and integrating and working together in harmony with the body, not just our personal vehicle, but the larger physical world. And then a third area is spiritual, and the spirit is a shuttle which communicates between the mind and the body. So as you balance your own personal thought distortions with your personal body distortions and the collective body distortions, that is when you're doing spiritual work. So 4.18 is Dawn saying, I believe I have some idea of the accomplishment, a little idea anyway, of the accomplishment of the first step. Could you elaborate the steps? The other two steps I am not familiar at all with. And Ra says, I am Ra, imagine the body. Imagine the more dense aspects of the body. Proceed therefrom to the very finest knowledge of energy pathways which revolve and cause the body to be energized. Understand that all natural functions of the body have all aspects from dense to fine and can be transmuted to what you may call sacramental. This is a brief investigation of the second area. To speak to the third, imagine, if you will, the function of the magnet. The magnet has two poles. One reaches up, the other goes down. The function of the spirit is to integrate the up-reaching yearning of the mind-body energy with the downpouring and streaming of infinite intelligence. This is a brief explication of the third area. All right, so here Ra's explaining more about the body and the spirit because they aren't as obvious. Ra says that all aspects of the body, all natural functions of the body can be from dense to fine and transmuted to what you may call sacramental. So let's take an example. One thing that happens in the body, say you're living in a house, things get dirty in your house. Dust accumulates. No matter how much you use the powers of your mind, you can't do the dishes with your mind. You have to physically do the dishes or pay somebody else to do the dishes or tell your kids to do the dishes or whatever. Somebody has to do the dishes for the dishes to get done. This isn't something that the mind can overwrite and just poof, the dishes are done. So You can either perform that chore of taking care of the body in a way that feels heavy and dense and like a burden, and just be exhausted at the mere thought of having to go do the dishes. Or you can move it along the spectrum, and when you can get to the sacramental level of this necessary bodily function, you can say, look, I am washing the dishes, I am cleaning this space, I'm cleaning my home for myself, for my family, to have a clean home that's easy to live in, that's easier to cook in, that smells nice, that doesn't attract bugs. I'm doing all these things because I love myself, I love the Creator, I love creation, I love my life. Now, that may be a reach for most people to have those kinds of thoughts while you're doing the dishes, but it is possible. It's very possible to see all of the chores that we have to do as an honestation to the Creator, to our life, a service to ourselves, to others, to our house. So that's what I think of when Ra talks about this, these natural functions of the body. We can either see them as a burden, or we can see them as a privilege and a way to offer respect and love back to the creation that we are living in, that does have these chores that need to be done. Like, in the same thing with like brushing your teeth, grooming, all that kind of stuff. Like, nobody's gonna die if the dishes don't get done, or if you don't take a bath for a month. But when you do take a bath, you can see that as a way of taking care of your body, of, like, you know, if you have a small child, you're not going to let them just live in their own filth. You're going to take care of them. You're going to help them stay clean and stay healthy and feel good. So doing that for yourself as well is a way of serving the creation, of serving the Creator that is yourself, and not in the service to self way. I guess we can go on this little tangent, because I think a lot of people think of like self-care as serving the self. Service to self means that you're actually like manipulating and controlling other people. That's how you polarize service to self. Taking care of your own bodily needs, your own comforts, making your existence easy to exist in, your world easy to exist in. These things are not actually service to self polarizing, but they are service to self in the way that you need to treat yourself the way that you treat all of those that you love. You need to love and care for yourself at the same level that you would your most beloved. You know, like if you have an aging elderly pet who isn't able to make it outside every time they go to the bathroom and you have to clean them up, you know, that's like you're doing that out of love and care for that creature. And you should do the same thing for yourself. You should love and care for yourself in the same way as you would care for anyone outside of yourself. And so that's just one of the difficult paradoxes, I think, that a lot of people who are moving from mind to body, which is also pretty congruent with moving from green ray to blue ray, can work to integrate this idea that the self is worthy of the same type of care that we give to other people. Because that's when we become a martyr, is when we say, look, I don't have time to take a bath. I don't have time to brush my hair. I have to help other people. Well, if you're not helping yourself, you're still not doing as much as you could to help other people, because you are also the creator. How you treat yourself is how you treat all of creation. So anything that you can do as far as taking care of the body and loving your own body and nurturing your own body is nurturing all of creation. So that's my little spiel on understanding the natural functions of the body, having all aspects from dense to fine, and how to work to embody that and initiate the body, and to understand that what we're doing for ourselves is caring for other people. And if we are neglecting ourselves or asking ourselves to sacrifice certain things because we don't think we're worthy, then that's just projecting outward to all of creation, because we are all of creation. So then Ra speaks of the spirit, which is the function of the magnet. The magnet has two poles, the one reaches up, the other goes down. So reaching up is our energy body, our chakras from red to indigo, and reaching down is the spiritual energy. And if you are open in the heart, but blocked in the Blu-ray, again, initiated into the mind, but not yet initiated into the body, then your inner locus meeting point is going to be the heart. And that's where you're going to operate most of the time from. You're going to go down sometimes, you might go up sometimes, but ultimately, the best thing you can do is to keep those energy pathways open in order, because the energy is starting at the red and going up as high as it can. So all of the work on the mind and the body is also working with the chakras and the energy body and understanding how events and thoughts are contributing to blockages or crystallization of the chakras. And you can have your chakras open, but not have them crystallized. So the more work you do in those chakras will crystallize those chakras and essentially give you more power in reaching to the higher energy centers and going further and pushing higher. So, 419, Dawn asks, then would this training program involve specific things to do, specific constructions and exercise? And Ra says, I am Ra. We are not at this time incarnate among your peoples, thus we can guide and attempt to specify, but cannot by example show. This is an handicap. However, there should indeed be fairly specific exercises of mind, body, and spirit during the teach-learning process we offer. It is to be once again iterated that healing is but one distortion of the law of one. To reach an undistorted understanding of that law, it is not necessary to heal or, indeed, to show any manifestation, but only to exercise the disciplines of understanding. We would ask that one or two more questions be the ending of this session. So here, Ra sees Dawn's getting a little carried away with this idea of being able to heal, this power of being able to find someone who's sick and lay your hands on them and make them well again. This kind of like evangelical revival sort of energy. And they're saying, look, to have an undistorted understanding of the law of one, you don't have to have any proof of that. You don't have to be able to show that you have that undistorted understanding. And having something tangible to prove that you've gained this understanding and focusing on that can be a distraction. And so they just didn't want Dawn to think that doing miracles was a important aspect of the whole picture, because it really is only about exercising the disciplines of understanding. So really what is most important is the configuration of your mind complex, not necessarily the configuration of your body complex, and being able to manifest anything dramatic in your body, whether it's your body or somebody else's body. So, Dawn asks, my objective is primarily to discover more of the law of one, and it would be very helpful to discover techniques of healing. I am aware of your problem with respect to free will. You cannot make suggestions, so I will ask you if you can state the law of one and the laws of healing to me. And Ra says, I am Ra. The law of one, though beyond the limitations of name, as you call vibratory sound complexes, may be approximated by stating that all things are one, that there is no polarity, no right or wrong, no disharmony, but only identity. All is one, and that one is love light, light love, the infinite creator. One of the primal distortions of the law of one is that of healing. Healing occurs when a mind-body-spirit complex realizes, deep within itself, the law of one, that is, that there is no disharmony, no imperfection, that all is complete and whole and perfect. Thus, the intelligent infinity within this mind-body-spirit complex reforms the illusion of body, mind, or spirit to a form congruent with the law of one. The healer acts as energizer or catalyst for this completely individual process. One item which may be of interest is that a healer asking to learn must take the distortion understood as responsibility for that ask receiving, thus healing. This is an honor duty which must be carefully considered in free will before the asking. So, Ra here states that the law of one is about recognizing that all is whole and perfect and infinite, and that's really the simple aspect of the law of one. If you can internalize those concepts, then you will find an alleviation of the distortions of your body. But I think the important part of this question to me, and again, this is just my opinion, I think that when Ra says here that the healer asking to learn must take the distortion understood as responsibility for that ask receiving, thus healing, this is an honor duty which must be carefully considered in free will before the asking. So again, this is referring to the law of responsibility, that once you know better, you have to embody that knowing, that awareness, and do better and act on that knowing and awareness. And I believe that at this point of the material, when all of us read this line, we're also agreeing to the same thing that Dawn is agreeing to, taking on that responsibility, that honor duty of healing in the ways that are subtle or overt, if we go on from this point, if we continue to take in the specific healing techniques that Ra is about to give all of us. By doing that, we are agreeing to the same thing, the responsibility for that ask and receiving, and the honor duty that must be carefully considered in free will before asking. Like, we're not just reading a book here, right? We're participating in this conversation between Ra and Dawn, and we're receiving the same things that Dawn received from Ra. We've received almost everything that Dawn and Ra talk about. If you've read all the books, you've read almost absolutely everything that Dawn has as well. So there isn't a distinction between reading this series of steps, reading this information, and gaining this knowledge, and having it told to you by Ra directly. Because, this is about as direct as it's going to get. So, just something I think to consider if you're not prepared to embody these teachings, that is something just really that you should sit with in meditation. Because let's say you are experiencing some sort of distortions in your body, and part of it is because you haven't been applying some of these teachings because they aren't convenient, or you don't necessarily believe in them completely. Those things don't really matter because you've already received the information. And now, mind you, I don't really know why the law of responsibility works that way, why we have to embody the things that we've learned, why we have to use our awareness of the way things are to become different than we were before. But as we go on and talk about it more, like Ra talks about this a lot, actually. And so it's just something really important to consider, that if you haven't taken those steps, like in full faith, if you're really interested in this and you've been studying it for a while, but you're still kind of skeptical, really think about whether or not you should continue studying this if you're not going to try to apply these learned teachings from Ra. Not trying to call anyone out. I'm just trying to matter-of-factly state what my interpretations are of this philosophy in a holistic way. And I do believe that there are some people who might be hearing this, who this would resonate with. This kind of half in, half out. As the Bible says, you cannot have two masters. You cannot live in the worldly, physical, third density reality and then also have one foot in the spiritual reality. You can't go back and forth. Eventually, that's going to catch up with you in certain ways. So, I'm sorry if that's not fun to hear. I don't think the law of responsibility is one of the most fun part of this philosophy, but it is an integral part, and I think it should definitely, like I said, if you're experiencing distortions of the body and also aren't fully buying into everything and trying to apply these different practices that Ra does give us, because session 5, this next one, is going to have specific practices. If you've never done any of these, if you don't sit in meditation, because Ra says, that's the very first step, is meditating. If you haven't started meditating yet, just think about it. Just think about maybe integrating some of these teachings into your life, even if it isn't convenient. It's never convenient. But in the grand scheme of things, in the overall picture of your life experience, it's immensely useful. So, we're about ready to wrap it up now. We're at question 4.21. Dawn asks, I assume that we should continue tomorrow. And Ra says, I am Ra. Your assumption is correct unless you feel that a certain question is necessary. This instrument is best nurtured by approximately this length of work. So Dawn asks, one short question. Is this instrument capable of 2 of these sessions per day, or should we remain with 1? And Ra says, I am Ra. This instrument is capable of 2 sessions a day. However, she must be encouraged to keep her bodily complex strong by the ingestion of your foodstuffs to an extent which exceeds this instrument's normal intake of your foodstuffs, this due to the physical material which we use to speak. Further, this instrument's activities must be monitored to prevent overactivity, for this activity is equivalent to a strenuous working on the physical level. If these admonitions are considered, the 2 sessions would be possible. We do not wish to deplete this instrument. And Dawn says, "Thank you, Ra." And Ra says, "I am Ra. I leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite intelligence, which is the Creator. Go forth in the power and the peace of the one, Adonai." So here at the end, Ra is saying that, yeah, you can do 2 sessions a day, but you have to do be a lot more careful with Carla. She has to reserve her physical strength to do this, and as well as build up her physical strength by consuming more calories than she usually does. However, spoiler alert, Ra admits later on that this was probably an overestimation of the instrument's capabilities. They do end up kind of depleting her by doing 2 sessions a day over a short period of time here. They kind of cram them all in. And Carla was just very fragile, very tiny little woman, and it was also very hard for her to restrict her activity, which Ross says, that her activities must be monitored to prevent overactivity, and she loved doing. Carla loved performing the service of just doing stuff, of cleaning, of cooking, of all the little mundane tasks. She saw the sacramental in all of those mundane tasks and loved doing those things. So these requests were pretty difficult for Carla. And also, as another little piece of trivia, Carla loved cooking. And Dawn actually wouldn't let Carla cook after a certain period of time, definitely by the time that the raw material was going on. When Carla would cook, he would overeat. And he started to gain weight because Carla had found all of his mother's old recipes and would cook him all of his favorite foods from when he was a child, and he would just eat and eat and eat, and he gained a lot of weight. So finally he had to ban Carla from the kitchen. And so when Jim moved in, Jim took up the responsibility of cooking, but they really just ate out a lot. And so, yeah, I think if Carla could have been able to cook for herself, or at least participate in the process of preparing food and preparing meals for herself, the first admonition of Ra to make sure to overeat would have been easier for her to accomplish. But Dawn did not want to overeat. Dawn did not want to gain weight. And so, yeah, that was something Carla had to put on her altar of sacrifice to please Dawn, unfortunately. But she was more than willing to do that. And if she wasn't willing to sacrifice so much for Dawn, we wouldn't have the Ra contact. So everyone has their distortions. We all make our choices, and we can still do amazing, magical, profound things with our distorted selves. So that is it for session 4. And I hope that was useful. There's a lot of deep, heavy things here in this session as we start to learn about healing and how to heal the mind and the body. And again, we get introduced not in name, but to the concept of the law of responsibility. We will hear the actual term, the law of responsibility, so doing a quick search, it actually looks like Ra doesn't mention the law of responsibility specifically by name until session 22. And then they only say those 3 words in that order in 3 different questions. There might be another turn of phrase that they use for the law of responsibility, I don't know, but the law of responsibility is important, and Ra doesn't name it precisely because it is so heavy. It really is a heavy thing, but I do think it's important, and I will point out other places in the material where Ra is alluding to this law, even if they aren't saying it by name. So, thank you. Thank you for listening to session 4, and I will continue to get these out at the rate that I am able, and I appreciate everyone's support so far. Again, if you have any feedback, questions, comments, whatever, I can take it. Happy to hear it. More than happy to hear it. You've spent this amount of time listening to me. I'm happy to listen to you. So thank you all, and I hope to see you next time.